think it's fair to say that Nocturnal takes inspiration from Prince of Persia, but also games like Dead Cells. This isn't a roguelite, which I'm actually really pleased to say, but it's a fast-paced action platformer that also caters to speedrunners if that's your cup of tea. When something in 2023 describes itself as challenging, you know you're in for a bit of a roller coaster ride. Thanks to Plugin Digital for the review copy. Do developer Sunnyside Games see the bright side of the Switch, or would this one be better clinging to the shadows? Well, my name is Mark Walker. Welcome back to SwitchUp. Now, let's find out. Nocturnal sees you playing as an ancient soldier, a part of the Order known as the Enduring Flame, who returns to the island aboard a small boat. The Order of the Enduring Flame has suffered heavy losses, and there are those amongst them who think you went rogue and betrayed them. As you make your way back into the heart of the island, you discover the Dark Mist, acting both as chief antagonist but also an integral part of the gameplay. Carrying your flaming sword, you aim to bring back light to the island, drive out the mist, and also get to the heart of the problem. From a gameplay and control standpoint then, the aforementioned Prince of Persia can certainly be seen in some of the platforming segments. This isn't a Metroidvania, you won't be working your way through intricately designed maps. Instead, they're well-crafted platforming sections interspersed with swift, timing-based combat ones. The mist fills almost every area of the island, and by lighting your sword on fire, you can carry the flame with you, but only for a finite amount of time. The flame will be used to unlock doors, it will do more damage to enemies as well as set environmental objects on fire, and as long as that saber is ablaze, it will stop the oppressive mist. Nocturnal is combat, platforming, and a little bit of puzzling, but let's start with combat. The emphasis here is on fast-paced attacks, using the flame to do more damage. You can do a dodge roll, throw a knife which slows time down, and you'll unlock other abilities as the game goes on. Attacks will rely on that flame to do damage against certain enemies, with those who dwell in the mist being invulnerable to normal attacks. This means that certain combat instances have a puzzle element to them, as you attempt to try and keep your sword ablaze, all the while looking at a bar at the bottom of the screen that's gradually diminishing. When this reaches 0, the flame goes out, and if there's no other torches around, that mist will creep in and it'll be the end of you. This mechanic is used more as the game goes on and becomes much more challenging. I certainly enjoy the combat. It works well, it's fast-paced, and you don't have to think about a great deal of mechanics. You won't be holding up a shield to block, you'll simply be rolling out of the way. But it can be a little bit tricky to time some of those evasions. But you do have a couple of cool moves thrown in for good measure, and a well-timed sword swing to deflect an incoming projectile is always going to be cool. The only real weakness of combat comes down to the way the game's animated. As you can see, it has an almost stuttery look to it, something we've seen in a few releases recently. But whereas Dead Cells was all about those fluid animations and instant feedback, here it can almost feel like there's a very minor latency. It's a shame, because I think the combat is excellently designed using that flame mechanic. It feels nice and fresh, and some fights will have you scrabbling to keep the torches alight, which will be your only means of doing damage, but then also to heal yourself, it will use up the last of your flame, forcing you to rush back to the nearest torch to relight my fire. Oh, I sang that in my head as well. Nocturnal properly rewards the player for defeating its tough bosses. For example, after the first one, you'll take his throwing dagger, and that will become a new ability. Throughout the world, you'll find pots containing ashes, which you'll use to upgrade your character at these shrines. Now, personally, I would suggest first and foremost upgrading the length of time that torch stays alight. Just a few more seconds can mean the difference. The next third of Nocturnal is the exploration and platforming. There are a few platform sections where you'll have to escape the mist, as it'll either force you from left to right, or at times have the camera descend and you have to keep up with it, lighting the torches as you go. And while these are well designed, they can feel a little unforgiving. Although there are a reasonable number of checkpoints, I didn't like the floaty nature of the camera. It seems to follow the player at a slower pace than your movement. This means you can almost leave the edge of the screen, and it's barely caught up with you. In a game that requires precision platforming with the protagonist, it feels a bit peculiar as you wait for the camera to catch up, or else sometimes fall down a crevice that you couldn't see. And this issue is made worse by the fact that the reload time is around 25 seconds. It's something we'll look at in the performance section. At its best, Nocturnal has some excellently designed platforming sections, and those tend to be the ones that rely more on you learning the moves at a pace you're comfortable with. It's clear that the speedrunning elements of the game are intrinsic to some of its design, but to make a slightly unusual comparison, something like Super Meat Boy, which also has a speedrunning element, allows you to respawn instantly. Waiting 25 seconds between those, not as much fun. The final third of the game centers around the puzzles, and they'll generally involve your flaming sword. You'll have to light torches in a specific order, reach a certain area over several platforms, and then activate a torch to unlock a door, or rush through the claustrophobic darkness, trying to reach an area before that sword goes out. The three elements of Nocturnal do work really well together. Unfortunately, as we'll see in the next section, the age-old trope now for the Nintendo Switch is performance. With that aside, I do enjoy the gameplay. There's a good balance between fast-paced combat, some well-designed platforming, and a real sense of challenge, and then some slower, more story-oriented sections that will have you sat chatting to another character within this world. Gameplay scores 16 out of 20. The controls are affected by the frame pacing and that lethargic camera. They score 14 out of 20. Visually then, I think the artists over at Sunnyside Games have done a really nice job. The character designs, as well as those of the world, they carry a real sense of place about them. You'll find parallax scrolling, lots of small details, pots that smash open with a satisfying sound, HD rumble that is just about right. Alas, performance. Now, it strangely runs at 30 frames per second, but the frame pacing seems to be slightly awry. You probably noticed it in the footage. It's akin to when Soldiers first released. It has an almost stutter about it, despite being able to maintain its frame rate. This becomes problematic in many of its systems, such as combat and platforming, and although it's not the worst I've ever seen and you do get used to it, it needs tightening up. Then you've got those load times that I mentioned. They need to bring those right down, as a tricky 10-second platforming section, followed by over double that waiting for the respawn. I'm sure that's not the way it was meant. While they've opted for a minimalist soundtrack, the audio fidelity is very high. There's no voice acting here, but you'll find handwritten notes, and it uses its musical score quite sparingly to good effect in those downtimes. It is one that looks nice in handheld. As for text size, well, I'll let you be the judge of that, but for me, visuals and performance together score 14 out of 20, sound and audio score 18 out of 20. Your first run through of Nocturnal will take you around 5 or 6 hours, with some replayability if you're interested in the speedrunning elements of it. Up until the 14th of June, it has a 10% discount, which takes it down to £16.19. Despite a few loose ends that need tidying up, like the camera, Nocturnal feels quite fresh for the genre. Its light and dark mechanics don't feel forced, and they do enhance the experience. Still, it might be a little on the shorter side for some people. I'd give value 15 out of 20. If Nocturnal was running at 60 frames per second with fast load times, it would be a more enjoyable experience. Still, it's fun and takes influence from some of my favourite games, and it gets a SwitchUp score of 77%. Let me know in the comments, did you have your eye on this one, or both of them, and are you ready to get your flaming sword out to battle the creatures of the mist? Thanks to all of you that enjoy the content. If you want to buy any physical games, use our PlayAsia code, or if you want to pick up eShop credit, go to switchup.gg, where you can get our coins as well as Nintendo coins when you redeem your eShop code. If you're interested, go check out our All Patched Up series, where we revisit games to see if they've improved, or our Interesting Games, which is a bit more like a podcasty episode. For all things Nintendo all the time, keep it switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!